In this demo we're going to show you how to use Relight to make a lion. Now Relight is actually used to create the fur, the mane of the lion, as well as the grass around it, and to do the lighting, so we're going to show you how that works. Here we're looking at the fur, the mane of the lion. The way the mane was generated is we use what we call a fur-gen tessellator to generate automatically, procedurally, hairs on an underlying surface, which you just saw, using a certain number of procedural parameters like curliness, length, direction, etc. And this is the hair with the fur which results. Then what we do is we use those hairs as guide hairs for another tessellator, which is going to interpolate them. You can see we use a certain number of textures as input to modify the direction of the hairs, the length, etc. And this is the final result. Now you'll see that the underlying geometry is quite complex. If you take a look at the image which was generated, or more precisely the deep file that was generated, if you click on a pixel, you can see that at that pixel 137 geometrical fragments are visible. There's lots of little fur fragments. Now if you look at the shader tree for the fur, you can see that there's one shader node for the texture, and we have a fur material. We have a different material for the background. That was the background image you saw. That's a rendering of the background image. And this is the shader tree for the lights. Now we can see here that there are two different lights. The first is a spotlight, a simple spotlight. So the first thing we need to do for a spotlight is to compute the shadow map. That's what's being computed now. And this is the resulting shadow map. And if we shade with just the spotlight, that's the result. Next we have an ambient light. We're going to turn off ambient occlusion for the time being and just use a constant ambient light to show you what it looks like. So that's the result using the spotlight, the background image, and a simple ambient light. Now what we're doing is we're connecting ambient occlusion to the color of the ambient light so that the lion casts shadows upon itself. In fact, what you can see here is that we're actually using two different ambient occlusion shaders. The first one, this one, is basically for the low frequencies. It's a shader which sees only the ground and the lion without all its fur. So here we're calculating that first ambient occlusion shader. And then there's a second one for the lion with its fur, for handling the higher frequencies. So here we select that other ambient occlusion shader, compute the point cloud, and then compute the shader, the ambient occlusion using that point cloud. Now computing the ambient occlusion takes a little bit of time, but compared to ambient occlusion using ray tracing, it's much quicker on fur than doing full ray tracing on fur. So here we're computing the result of the second ambient occlusion shader with the hair of the lion, or the mane rather, the mane and the fur. And when that's done, what you'll see is there's a third shader node there, which is used to combine the two ambient occlusion shaders. Basically, it multiplies them together. And that's the result of the ambient occlusion. And if we hook up the ambient occlusion to the ambient light, that is the final result. Then we add back in the spotlight and the background image. And that's our lion with and without ambient occlusion. Now what we're going to do is to add global illumination. So we add a global illumination light source, and the global illumination light source is going to model the diffuse reflection of light. In what we're interested in particular here is the reflection of light from the ground up to the lion. So here we're saying that the global illumination's point cloud sees only the ground, so that's going to be very quick to compute. That's the point cloud for the ground, for the global illumination. Now we're going to shade the point cloud, and that's very quick. And there's the result. Now the result, which you can almost see here, is not yet using ambient occlusion. It's just a direct reflection of the ground, of the light from the ground to the lion. So now we're going to hook up the ambient occlusion, which we already computed for the ambient light source, to the global illumination as well, and that is the result. We're going to crank up the intensity so you can really see it. So this is just light reflected from the ground onto the lion. Then we add back in the spotlight, the ambient light, and the background, and that's the result. So you can see the result with and without global illumination. Now what we're going to do, since the color of the grass and the lion is very similar, it's not very obvious what's happening perhaps. So we're going to change the color of the grass, make it green. Green, both the short grass and the long grass. There we go. And we reshade. And that's just the grass. And we reshade the point cloud for the global illumination. And re-render. And now you can see the green light from the grass clearly reflected onto the lion's fur. So this is just the intensity of the global illumination light. The lion shaded just with global illumination and the final image. Now we're going to do one last thing. We're going to take that the spotlight, and we're going to change the position of the spotlight in the 3D viewer. We're going to place it behind the lion. We're going to need to recompute the shadow map for the spotlight, of course, since its position changed. That takes a second. And when we're done, we can shade again. And it's recomputing everything, the global illumination, the ambient light, ambient occlusion, etc. And that is the final result.